Hello, you're listening to The Booking Club with Jack Aldane, the podcast that brings you today's leading authors and commentators from a table at their favourite places to eat and drink. On the menu today, good things come to those who wait, according to Henry Oliver, author of Second Act, What Late Bloomers Can Tell You About Reinventing Your Life. If the names Catherine Graham, Ray Kroc and Samuel Johnson don't mean anything to you, hopefully by the end of this episode they will. They are going to feature in this conversation I'm about to have about the book Second Act, What Late Bloomers Can Tell You About Reinventing Your Life, with its author Henry Oliver, who sat opposite me at Ye Olde Cheshire Cheese on Fleet Street. Henry, it's now down to you to tell us why we're sat here. Many Samuel Johnson fans will be saying at this very point, but where else?
We are here because Samuel Johnson lived 2 minutes away. The Johnson house is still there in Gough Square. It was the only house that didn't get bombed out in the Blitz. And so we think he probably came to this pub to drink and, more importantly, to argue with people. I don't think we actually know that he came here, but they're convinced he did. And he loved to come to the pub with wine and conversation with people who could confront him politically or aesthetically. So he would have come here, I'm sure, to indulge in that. And I think we know that his servant, Frank Barber, used to come here. There were very few black people in London at that time, but there were gatherings in places like this to talk about abolition and freedom and questions like that. So this was a very lively centre of London life for Johnson.
Also, we've got in the corner there, next to a fire extinguisher, a chair that is supposed to have belonged to him.
They have his chair, his tankard, all of these things. I don't know if it's true, but I'm happy to go with it.
Life is too short sometimes to question these things to the nth degree, unless you're writing a biography, which I know is something that you've studied as a discipline.
Yes, well, Johnson was one of the first great English biographers. There were others before him that he admired, but he said biographers don't know what they're doing. They fill their books up with all this rubbish. They don't take any care over it. And he wrote many splendid biographies. And his friend James Boswell wrote the biography of him, which is one of the most exciting and interesting books.
Certainly is.
In English,
It's
right?
great.
And you can just open it wherever, and there are arguments and people there are wonderful lines. Someone says something and Johnson says, no, you've got that wrong, and explains it. And the man says, I don't quite follow what you mean. And Johnson says, sir, I have found you an argument. I am not obliged to find you an understanding. So it's full of these wonderful ripostes and things. And what Johnson and Boswell knew is that lines like that are why we go to biography. Show me the man. Show me the personality. What was it actually like to be Samuel Johnson? Not this kind of skimming through the life with your theories and your summaries and your explanations. Actually show me. If he was here now, give me some sense of how we would feel.
He's one of the most extraordinary strivers. And, of course, the book that you've written is all about life's great strivers and what we can learn from them. Because unlike the precocious, unlike the virtuosos, unlike child prodigies, early bloomers, strivers strive for a reason. It takes them a long bloody time to get to where they want to be. So perhaps we can go back to the beginning then of what got you thinking about this book. I know that you had a career working with brands around how to hire talent, how to define talent, how to go looking for it, and how not to fall into some of the traps of confusing qualification with talent, of being able to spot things that most employers couldn't spot. That sounds like where it must have begun for you to get your mind working in this direction.
Yes, well, I admired Johnson from a young age. I was reading bits of the dictionary at school, and then I read Boswell and plenty of Johnson's own works at university. And what I realized is when I'd been working in talent attraction for a few years is that I was already interested in some of these late bloomers, but I hadn't thought of them as late bloomers. Working in talent attraction, I was constantly being asked, where can we hire people? You know, if you remember the pre-COVID economy, it was a very tight labor market. Right? There were vacancies, more than 1 million vacancies. So I was looking in the data saying to people, a lot of over 50s, over 55s, this is a big area. We should be going out to these people. They've got experience, they've got expertise, they've done decades in the labor force, right? And people just weren't that interested. And it started to bug me. Like, I don't have another answer for you. The data says what it's, if you don't want to go after them, I don't have some magic second group of people. And I started to put these two sides together and realize that there is such a thing as the naturally occurring late bloomer. And we haven't paid quite enough attention to why does that happen? How does that happen? Who are these people?
What you've done here is you've been able to give accounts of some of the best examples of people who later on in life found their moment, and it was through an accumulation of disappointments, a lot of trial and error, and often just a lot of distraction, right? Things that appear to be very unproductive in our lives turn out to bear fruit in ways that we couldn't possibly have imagined. It was all happening at the level of the subconscious.
I get a little cautious when I hear people describe it like that, because it's not quite as passive as it sounds. A lot of these people are harboring some sense. They know within themselves that they are the poet or whatever. What they are finding challenging is getting that out in some way, finding a channel of action or communication for that. Whereas I think what some people want to believe is that you can just drift along and things will accumulate and this is all kind of happening under the surface, but we can't really give an account of what's happening. I suspect that is much less likely to succeed than those people who have something that needs to come out.
That's really important.
Right?
This is a book about and for the ambitious.
Some people say to me, I always thought I was going to be a late bloomer. And I'm like, oh, great. What kind of thing? What are you going to bloom in? And they go, oh, I don't really know. Now, I don't want to be mean, so I don't say anything. But some of those people will bloom for sure. But if you don't know what it is you want to do, it's not, I doubt that it's like happening unconsciously or whatever. It may be that you have these kind of amorphous interests and talents, and you haven't yet been able, as with me in this book, to say, oh, I happen to be interested in this. I happen to know about this. I can go and do that. But you will have some sense of yourself as, I knew I was interested in these particular people, these kinds of topics, writing, history, social science, whatever. You will have some sense of what it is that you want to do. And you'll see all the examples in this book, even the people who truly actually start very late. They're 40, 50, 60, 70 before they do any of the things that they become accomplished at. There are always related interests in their past, right? So Audrey Sutherland becomes a kayaker and an explorer. She's been swimming. She's been out in the mountain. When she is a child, I think she goes out and sleeps in the mountains one night on her own, and it's a bit of a big deal. You know what I mean? There's always a trail back in your life. So I would encourage people not just to take the passive message from this book, but to really be thinking about what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I want to do? And how have I accumulated towards that already?
Well, obviously we started this conversation, as I knew we would, on the subject of Dr. Samuel Johnson, but I mentioned those three names at the beginning, and those are the three names that I found most compelling and the ones that I wanted to talk about, although there are other names that will probably come in. Let's talk about Ray Kroc. I actually happened to watch the movie The Founder again.
I hate that film.
Why do you hate it, sorry?
They just get it all wrong. I'm sorry to just go off on one.
Is it factually wrong?
Yeah. The film has a presiding ideology which leads them to believe that Ray Kroc stole McDonald's from the brothers. And that isn't true. And if you have a different presiding ideology, you can see the whole Ray Kroc story in quite another light. And I think basically they lied about his character and his motivations. I'm not saying that there was nothing grasping, venal, greedy, whatever
but
about
Hollywood
Ray
has
Kroc.
to create drama if there isn't sufficient drama.
I find the real story incredibly dramatic. Excuse me. He was a milkshake mixer salesman who ended up founding the largest global business. Like, what's not dramatic? This idea that Hollywood they must have the antagonists and the three-act story.
Yeah.
It's all just screenwriter bullshit.
Heroes
that's
and
the
villains.
one model.
Yeah.
Get another model, guys. There are a million ways of telling a good story. You don't have to trash Ray Kroc. I'm not going to go on my hobby horse for too long, but
I love the movie, but now tell me the real story of Ray Kroc and why he was indeed a late bloomer and what we can learn from him.
The long and the short of it with Ray Kroc is that he was selling these milkshake mixers. He's in the middle of his career. He's got to the point where his friends are saying, oh, Ray's had another business idea. Here goes Ray again. Right? His wife is like, will you stop with this nonsense? And one day, a family restaurant ordered, I think, 6 mixers. Now, these machines can each make, I think, 6 milkshakes. So his immediately is thinking, why do they need to make that many milkshakes all at once? This is a small family hamburger place. That's crazy, right? No one else would do this. In response to that, Ray Kroc flew halfway across the United States to go to the restaurant. And when he got there, he had this incredible revelation. Fast food at this time, the way we think of fast food didn't quite exist at that point. Fast food was not fast. No. It would take 15 minutes and the burger would be cold, and like the whole thing was just not very good.
It really jars with our understanding of how America worked throughout the 20th century. I think we believe that America has always been a fast culture, that service has always mattered.
Yes.
But as you see, forgive me, in the film, since that's my main source material, not yours, the service was pretty poor and the clientele were pretty seedy and wayward. And actually, it was all pretty chaotic for a country that was founded on the idea of doing these things better than anywhere else in the world.
Oh, yeah. And it was quite an open thing that waitresses would be hired to be pretty and to look good on the roller skates as they went round between the cars. No one was actually saying, we need really good serving staff here and we need to get the food there. Like, we just want everyone to look nice and have a good time, right? So you had a cold burger. So Ray Kroc gets there and he realizes, I don't think he does the calculation, but he can see a burger and fries is coming out of the hatch every 50 seconds, which this was a huge, huge improvement. No one else is doing this. So he has this kind of great moment of thinking like, we can spread this. But what's really funny is his first thought is, we can spread this. We can open dozens of these. This is going to take over the place. Think how many milkshake mixers I will sell. So he wasn't being too ambitious at the start. And he starts talking to the people who own it, and they showed him around the kitchen, and they basically just let him in on all their secrets.
Yeah, the two brothers. We should name them since, well, history hasn't been kind to them.
I don't think so. I think there are plenty of books, films, Daily Mail articles. People are always...
We just can't remember their names.
I just can't remember their names. But the point is, they were really good at the kitchen design. They laid the whole thing out and planned it so it could work very rapidly and very efficiently. But what they couldn't do was scale it. They had tried to franchise the business before. I think they'd got up to 4 or 5 restaurants. But every time someone else tried to run their model, the chips were soggy, the burgers weren't cooked properly. It was very, very hard for them to maintain their standards. And they were quite open. They said, we couldn't do that. And I think more importantly, they didn't want to. They didn't actually want, creating that kind of thing is very different to scaling it and turning it into a franchise. They're two completely separate tasks. The idea that, this is what gets said, he steals the kitchen idea. He steals the model of how to make a fast kitchen, and that's it. Job done. All he has to do is turn it into the biggest business in the world. That's insane. Yeah. They're two very, very different things. So they did very well out of what they did.
Richard and Maurice.
There you go. And he did, Ray Kroc did very well out of what he did. And they were totally separate things. Ray Kroc could not have invented that kitchen. They were working with decades of improvements in fast food, from cafeterias and trays. Burgers used to be loose mince between bread. They'd been turned into patties and buns. They'd been made fast food because of all the cars that were coming with the Eisenhower highways. So they'd taken that decades of development and really perfected it. Ray Kroc could never have done that. Ray Kroc developed a business model that said, when you franchise that and you run one of our restaurants, you will damn well make sure you do everything exactly right. And they were incapable of doing that. So they needed each other. And what they hadn't anticipated, I think, is when you take that restaurant and put it in another state, where the weather is different, the air humidity is different, this affects how the potatoes are stored, this affects how the potatoes are cooked, so the chips are coming out wrong, no one can work out why we've got everything exactly right, the temperature and the oil, it's the storage of the potatoes, we've got it right. So Ray Kroc works through hundreds and hundreds of those sorts of problems. And that's he gives it the level of attention that they did, but he's solving a totally different problem. So the idea that he stole it or something is insane. He had the ability to franchise a business, which was new. Like no other fast food company had managed that either. Some of them had got up to a few dozen restaurants, but to maintain what everyone wanted at that time was uniform standards. Yeah. They wanted to go to the same place, like the same restaurant in different counties, different states, and get the same thing. These guys who had franchised had to go to frozen burgers to do that. And Ray Kroc said, we will never go to frozen burgers because that's a huge quality dip. What's the point? What's the point of doing that? So it was really an insane achievement that he managed. He started at, I think, 57. So most people are winding down, thinking about retirement. I'm going to play some more golf. Ray Kroc is just getting started.
And that's the point, isn't it? It happened so late on for him. And nothing about being a milkshake mixer salesman would have told you that this was a guy capable of doing what he did with McDonald's. But clearly, as you said, he had a sense of the success that he wanted to see. And he just so happened to, when he met Richard and Maurice, see something that he could work with, that they couldn't see. They couldn't see the big picture, but he could. What is it about Ray Kroc, then, that gives us clues as to who he became? Because, as I say, being a salesman alone doesn't tell us very much.
I think the two big things are that he's prepared to go to extraordinary lengths. So he flies halfway across the country just to go and have lunch in this restaurant, because why are they buying these mixers? He's already done something similar with his early career where he played in a jazz band, tried to get in a property boom in Florida. His life fell out from underneath him. He comes home with, the coat on his back, basically. So he goes to these extraordinary lengths, and his ambition, it never dies down. You don't see that in a lot of people, that they're still burning with it at the same level at 57 as they are in their 20s, when they have not had the level of success they want. The second thing is an incredible fussiness. I mean, this man was so fastidious that when you did your first day of work with Ray Kroc, he gave you one of those little packets like you get in the hotel, and it's got a comb and something to sort of pluck your eyebrows, and a nail clipper. You do not show up to work in front of Ray Kroc unless everything is neat and clipped and trimmed. He would go round and pick litter up off the floor. If he's visiting a McDonald's, he's the biggest guy in the world or whatever. He's picking up litter off the floor. When he was retired, he could see, if he had binoculars, he could see down to one of the restaurants near his home. And he basically spent his retirement calling that guy, going, I can see the guy cooking the chips. He's not doing it right. You've got to get in there and, right? Like, he would just never, ever give up on the little details. So those two things are with him throughout his career.
He was no stranger to and not afraid of opportunity cost, of taking big risks and spending a lot of money and traveling miles on the off chance that something might happen. That's one thing.
And when it hadn't worked out, that's why he'd got into first selling paper cups, then milkshake mixers.
Yeah.
You've got to do something steady. You've got to raise your family, like when the opportunities don't work out. But from being in those two, they sound disconnected, but paper cups and milkshakes, of course, put him throughout his career in hospitality and fast food. So he's always looking at the menus. He's always in the restaurants. He actually is spending a lot of time becoming an expert in how fast food is evolving. And as I said, so were the McDonald brothers, right? So they're both coming out of that industry.
There's a quote by Calvin Coolidge that appears again at the beginning of the film. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. Now, there's a lot about stories of people who spend a long time striving that smack of the American dream, smack of the promise that we're still all sold, whether we think we're inured to it or not, of you just got to hustle harder, you've just got to try harder, just keep going, keep going. But there is a lot to be said for persistence.
I strongly object to the idea that there is some kind of cultural force that's shaping you and determining you to be in this way. And whenever people say, we've been sold this idea, well, who was buying? Like, excuse me, there are two sides to a sale, okay? If you don't like it, shut up and do something, like quit the whining about it. Go and live on a farm or something. I don't care. So I just kind of reject the premise of that, for one thing. It's very easy in the modern world to not do that. I know plenty of drifters and idlers, very well educated. They're earning good money. I'm not saying they're derelicts, but you can do that. You can just have your life, do some work, go home, TV, kids. Like, that's a great life. No one is, who's constantly hounding these people saying, oh, is this enough? Are you hustling enough? Where's your sign? No.
It's not all get rich quick is what you're saying. Human accomplishment goes beyond.
The true situation here is people are ambitious, and we live in a society where ambition is more it's more possible to be ambitious than ever before. It's more possible to do something about the ambition inside. If you've got something inside that needs to come out and you're just some guy, you can do something about that now in a way that you couldn't 50, 100, 300 years ago. That's great. That's not, I've been sold hustle culture by late-stage capitalism, which is the result of No, people want to do stuff and they now have the chance to do it. And if you do it and it doesn't go as well as you want, you will feel bad and you'll yell about it. Of course. This happens to me. This happens to everyone. Like, fine. But human ambition is amazing. Human accomplishment is amazing. And if there's something you want to do and you have tried to do it, great. The alternative is living in a world where you didn't get to try. You don't want that, do you?
The point of the book is, as you say, it's a celebration of the human spirit.
Yeah.
And it's a celebration of self-knowledge.
One reason why I put in these long biographical chapters, which I'm quite sure made the book less commercial, is that you will get all this self-help about ambition and success and all this stuff. And at the end, it's some great dream thing, like you got rich, you got famous. Mm-hmm. The long chapters mean that you'll be reading about Samuel Johnson, all his early struggles. It's not working. He's living in filthy clothes. He's got no money. The whole thing is terrible. He gets the big breakthrough on the dictionary. Hurrah. He gets money. He does the Rambler. He's living in the nice big house. You think, great. Sam has made it. Finally. And then what's the first thing that happens after he publishes the dictionary? He gets imprisoned for debt.
Yeah.
So the long chapters, like, they take all this advice and self-help and whatever, and they put it in the real context of an actual life, right? Which is what you need. Like, he wrote the dictionary because that was an amazing thing to do, and because it brought him money, and because it brought him fame, but also because that's who he is, right? And I think all these things go together, and we should just be less fussy about how does this fit with my political ideas or my ideas about life. Just think about what you're trying to do and get on with it.
We're back to Samuel Johnson, and of course you said that 300 years ago people weren't able to enact their ambitions. But Samuel Johnson is an example of somebody who, coming from the provinces, coming from a relatively modest family, from a modest trade, was able to do great things. And we'll talk about him, I think, saving him till last,
sure.
Because I want, between Ray Kroc and him, to talk about Catherine Graham. In fact, no, let's talk first about Margaret Thatcher, a name that hasn't come up yet. She was a late bloomer too.
The interesting thing about Margaret Thatcher is that she was the exact average age of people who become Tory leader. So some people say to me, people who work in politics, like senior people in politics and journalism, Margaret Thatcher, she's not a late bloomer, because 50 or 51 basically is how old you are when you become Tory leader. But if you actually look at the details of her life, she's nothing like those other men, and they are all men in the 20th century, of course. She's not on the same trajectory in any way. No one is talking about her as a potential leader up till about a few weeks, 12 weeks before the leadership election. That's how late it gets. In the autumn of the year when they're saying we've got to have a leadership election, Ted Heath's got to go, she's 50-1 against at the bookies. And the MPs who are meeting to say who we're going to back, they're going through lists of names. Oh, we can't have Margaret. She's such a pain in the foot. She's so dreadful. So the idea that, she's somehow on this average trajectory is insane. She was in the cabinet because they needed a woman. Ted Heath is not married. He's not a family man. You've got to do something, right? And also, like, it's the 70s. It's getting to the sort of we need a token woman stage. So they give her education. And she's a little bit cross because this is the woman's brief. And she gives interviews saying, women can be defense secretary too. We don't have to do schools. We don't have to do children. So there's no sense in which she's hitting that average in the way that the rest of them are. And she astonishes everyone, including herself, by becoming Tory leader. And then she spends several years with everyone saying, well, this isn't going to work. We've got to get rid of her. We've got to change her. It's not going to happen. It's all right here in London, but they won't vote for a woman in the north, right? All the usual stuff. Mm-hmm. Then she wins an election. And everyone's saying, well, she's so right-wing. All this monetarism. She's so screechy. Oh, my God, she's dreadful. Of course we're going to lose in 83. This will never happen. She's dogmatic. All the usual stuff. Excuse me, she wins big in 83. This is the point at which people start to realize, okay, we're dealing with someone here. So, in fact, she is, that's a huge period. We're looking at the better part of a decade there. And by the time of the 87 election, that people often talk about that as a falling off, but that's when she becomes an international figure. She's very involved in the Cold War. Her reputation around the world is really built on that final 3 or 4 years, whereas in Britain here, we focus much more on the first few years and the trade union conflicts and things like that. So she's an extraordinary late developer.
She is, but she also brings to her political career that very interesting. And again, speaking about Ray Kroc, you know, what was he doing before? What sort of pieces of the puzzle did he already possess, and what was he putting together? She was a chemist. She was scientific. She was all about testing rational principles through empirical evidence, and then she brings all of that to bear in her political career, as well as being brought up Methodist, with all of that kind of that moral compulsion.
Yeah.
She has this, exactly, daughter of a grocer, etc. She also then brings this very steely, detail-oriented vision, because nothing goes unseen by her. A bit like Ray Kroc, she's obsessed with the small print.
Yep. Yeah, she really governed on paper. I interviewed Charles Moore about this, who obviously has edited The Telegraph and The Spectator and has been in the ins and outs of politics since the 80s. And he said she governed on paper and in detail in a way that no other prime minister really does. And to sustain that level of interest in the close detail day after day for 11 years is extraordinary. I mean, I think she had an almost weird ability to do that. And I was very interested. Martin Gilbert, who wrote the Churchill biography, he wrote a book about being Churchill's biographer, and he said he got a letter from Margaret Thatcher. When he published each volume of the story of Churchill's life, he published an accompanying volume of the documents. Now, obviously, most people aren't reading the document volume. It's for historians and so forth. Margaret Thatcher wrote to him about a footnote in the documents volume when she's just an MP at this point. And I thought that really was an illustration of how, you know, she's got children, she's got a job, she's got political ambitions, and there she is at night, sitting over the document volume, looking at the footnotes. Like, she always had that incredible ability for detail.
And also an incredible ability to sleep about 5 hours a night. Could you clarify something for me? I've always wanted to know exactly what Margaret Thatcher's role was in the creation and the science behind the Mr. Whippy ice cream.
I don't fully understand that myself.
So what did you order there, Henry?
I had the steak and kidney pudding, classic English dish in a classic English pub.
And how was it?
It was great. I liked it a lot.
I had the chicken schnitzel with house slaw, also really good. And we also had 2 pints of Sam Smith's
Dark ale.
Dark ale, a 0.5%. Very nice.
Samuel Johnson would be very unhappy with you not eating English food.
Yes, he would be, wouldn't he? I believe when he finished his dictionary, and again, we will get to Samuel Johnson later, he was told that a similar French effort had required many more times the number of
40
staff.
men and 40 years.
That's right. And he made some sort of remark. Well, 1 Englishman to every 40 Frenchmen. That sounds about right.
He loved all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But that said, he liked brandy. He wasn't totally against foreign imports.
It was a great time for foreign imports, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
of
it was
course.
the birth of the coffee house.
It's easy to paint him as a little Englander and a patriot, but actually he was very in favor of metropolitan commercial life.
He was a commercially minded man, wasn't
Very
he?
commercially minded. And he liked the idea that people would have order and hierarchy in society. And he has many quotes to that effect. But what he liked much more was like being able to go out to the market and earn his money and not be beholden to these like aristocrats and buffoons with their inherited wealth.
Yes.
So he was not quite as straightforward as he looked.
Because many of the great men of history, even Winston Churchill, again, in some ways a late bloomer, would you say?
Churchill's interesting. It depends how pro-Churchill you are.
Yeah.
So I'm like not as pro-Churchill as a lot of people. But let's just cut to the like 1939, 1940 Churchill good thing.
Right.
At that point, just before he becomes the leader, he's widely seen as a bit of a failure.
Uh-huh.
And the 1930s have been a very bad decade for him in many ways. So, and he's like 60.
Yeah.
So for that reason, you remember him very well. If he'd retired, if the war had happened differently, like whatever, you wouldn't talk about Churchill very much, and he would basically be remembered as a bit of a racist, a weirdo about India. Why is he obsessed with India? Like, this is crazy. And a guy who, like, made bad decisions as Chancellor.
We're getting too far away from the next person that we're meant to be talking about here, Catherine Graham, a name about which there is a film also, The Post.
Good film.
This time
Meryl Streep,
gets a thumbs up.
That's
thumbs
great.
up from
Watch
Henry
that
Oliver.
film.
So tell us about Catherine Graham then.
I didn't know about Catherine Graham before I wrote this book. And Anna Gatt, who runs Into Intellect, saw that I was doing a book on late bloomers, and she said, "Oh, you must read Catherine Graham's biography." So I went and got it, and I was completely stunned. What an incredible woman. I mean, one of the most remarkable stories. So a bit like Churchill, born into immense privilege, servants in the house, trips to Europe, very fancy schools. Her father he owns newspapers, he works at the Federal Reserve, like lots of connections. Her mother's a writer. They know all these intellectuals, really living this kind of charmed life. And she goes to the University of Chicago, not what everyone is doing, not what every woman is doing at that stage, gets a gold-plated education, and then goes to work at one of her father's newspapers, which he's not pushing that. She loves news. She's one of these people. She just loves the news. So one version of her story is charmed life. Of course, she ended up running the Washington Post company. Look at everything I've just told you, like servants in the house. Sure. But the second part of her life is like misery, almost a kind of degradation. Her mother's a bully. Her father's not there very much. Her self-confidence is crushed by her family life. The expectations are incredibly high, and it gives all of the children a kind of sense of the jitters, like, oh my God, he's going to ask me all these questions and I'm not going to know, and everything is a bit panicky. And the mother's very cold with her and clearly doesn't like her. So her self-confidence is in ruins. So you have very, very privileged and very, very disadvantaged in the same person. And it goes really wrong when she marries Phil Graham, who is manic depressive, alcoholic, and a bully. Now, obviously, that's very hard on him, and there's a kind of tragedy to his life. No one said manic depression to either of them until he was dead. So there's this whole sense of what the hell is happening, right? The confusion makes it worse. But she comes out of that marriage so underconfident that she can't get herself dressed for a party. What's he going to say? He has to pick the outfit, right? So she's been absolutely destroyed by the mother and then the husband. And one day, she wakes up from a nap and finds that Phil Graham has shot himself after a whole trail of misery. And the company lands in her lap. Her father put him in charge rather than her. No one questioned it because that was what they did, right? And her friends are saying, she's like 45, 46. She's never held a senior position. She's clearly a bit of a wreck from everything that's gone on. Her friends are like, well, you'll sell it. You should get rid of it. Obviously, you can't run it. And a lot of people in that position would have done that. And Catherine Graham said, the hell am I going to sell the family newspaper? And this kind of steel that had come from her privilege and had come from the fact that her father, he was quite distant, but he did believe in her. And he had said some nice things to her. This steel was still there. And so even though she didn't really know what she was doing, and she, according to her, did not understand finances and didn't like them and didn't want to do all that, she went in and learned how to run the business. And she became one of the most successful CEOs of the 20th century. So she had two things going for her, beside the privilege. She still loved the news. Like, she would do anything for that newspaper. Real devotion. But that inner steel, and that having been through all those problems and having to, endure, meant that when she was facing down strikes, dealing with people on the board who didn't like her, Richard Nixon's telling her, I'm going to screw up your launch on the stock market, like all these, excuse me, the best qualified person in America to put up with this kind of nonsense and abuse and really endure through it, because she's done that in her marriage, she's done that in her childhood.
Earlier on in this conversation when I spoke about the role of the subconscious, I think this is a good example of what I meant. Being underestimated in ways that appear to be completely unhelpful to a person's success turn out, in the case of Catherine Graham, to be. For example, being underestimated, being ignored, being an observer. I mean, a lot of the time, people who are marginalized and are bullied and are treated like shit are people who have the advantage of spending a lot of time watching other people and noticing and understanding and learning from the details of that, don't they?
And what she learned from all her observations, I think, was the importance of making decisions. So if you're the top job, like the CEO, it will often come down to this one decision that you make. And you might not have a lot of time. It might be a high-pressure situation. It might be, do we or do we not publish these government secrets? Right? Like, the clock is ticking. We have to go to print. Like, the courts are worried about this. Nixon's on the phone. And she had seen her husband. He was brilliant. He was a wonderful journalist. He was very clever. He knew everyone. He could network the whole town. He was not a good decision maker. He did not have the firmness of good leadership, whereas I think her father had been. And so what her observation gave her was knowing that when that call came, she had to have steel and get it right. And I think it was those sorts of decisions that built her career.
So finally, then, why did you like The Post?
Because I think they understood Catherine Graham very well. They paid a lot of attention to her book, I would guess. And they really understood the nature of her making those decisions in those very intense moments. I think that was the right way to do it.
Which British actor would you cast as Samuel Johnson in the film about Samuel Johnson's life?
I want Mike Leigh to do it with Timothy Spall.
Is that just because Timothy Spall played Turner?
Well, but also he was in Topsy Turvy and he did a great job in that.
Then let's talk about Samuel Johnson finally and fully. Born in Lichfield.
Yes.
Son of a bookseller.
Many ailments.
Disfigurement, cumbersomeness, lack of coordination.
He had scars on his face from a childhood disease. One of his eyes did not really work. He was very big and ungainly. He was well over 6 foot, big boned.
Yeah.
And he had twitches, basically. He couldn't really stop moving. He was a compulsive person. So he was sort of rocking in his father's shop. And we think that he did not go to church very much as a child because he did not want people staring at him, which is obviously, for a child, is very, very unpleasant thing to experience. And this persisted all through his life. Someone once walked into a drawing room and said, is that a lunatic in the corner? Thinking that this man had come out of Bedlam, and someone had to say, no, that's Dr. Johnson. You should you should not say that. Yeah. So he had real problems in that sense.
And all of these disadvantages in the earlier stages of his life cause him to be a man given to depressive states.
People talk about all sorts of things, Tourette's and various other conditions. We don't know. The melancholy was real. He was clearly a depressive person. I wouldn't say that it was because of his early disadvantages. I think he was naturally depressive. I think it's built into his temperament. His father seems to have been melancholic as well. And it's not unusual. Some people are like that, right?
Yeah, but you don't think not going to church for fear of being looked at had anything to do with that?
I think he was a very robust person, and he was very good at understanding people and not letting them get to him. But I think he was very sensitive about his position in the world and how he had used his talents and whether he'd achieved enough.
And that, the flip side to some of the depressive moments, as I've described, is that he had this unshakable self-belief.
I don't know. He certainly had a good understanding of his own talents.
He writes a letter to a quarterly or a journal at some stage, very presumptively for a person of his age.
This is the letter to the Gentleman's Magazine.
That's right, yeah. Giving advice about how he might greatly improve their poetry section.
I think he knew that he was good. There's a line in the life of Pope. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said Pope had the felicity to rate himself properly. And so he was it's a good line.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He had a very good understanding of the way that some writers overrate themselves, and this causes great problems. And obviously the inverse. So he knew that he was talented, and he worried, God gave me these talents. Have I used them? Have I been lazy?
Yes.
But I don't know how ambitious he was. I think what he worried about was he'd been given all these abilities, and had he done enough with them? Which is different from the common thing that we feel, which is, I am ambitious. Have I got it yet? Have I got there yet?
He was very religious, and he also knew that he was idle. But he's more than just aware of it. He's troubled by the fact that he is so given to sloth and procrastination. One thing I found quite relatable about Samuel Johnson was the fact that he had a sort of a modern tendency to read books and then put them down and pick up another one. And I say that because
someone talks about a book that they haven't finished, or they express surprise that Johnson hasn't finished a book, and he says, "Sir, do you mean to say that you read books through?"
We come now to his magnum opus. The dictionary written by Samuel Johnson is still available.
Yep.
Most easily online. You can just go and look it up, and you can type in any word you can think of, and there will be not just a definition, but a quotation that he carefully selected from his wide reading of what he considered to be the best writers to demonstrate the use of that word. Take us through the story of how he arrives at the moment of realizing this could be one of his greatest contributions to the literary world.
Before he writes the dictionary, he is really not doing very well. If he died at the age of 40, maybe, you might talk about him as a poet, a minor poet of the period. Not that minor, but you just wouldn't really know him. He's living in poverty almost. And because the French are writing a dictionary, obviously the English must now write a dictionary. We can't let them do it and we not do it. So the booksellers of London are talking about who's going to write this thing. This is a hell of a project, right? We don't do what France does and do it institutionally through the state. This is London. This is a big mess. We have to coordinate this. And so the question of who can write a dictionary is really not an easy one. And there is a bookseller that Johnson knows because he's constantly in the shop. And this bookseller, he knows that Johnson is, as we've talked about, I wouldn't say that he is an idle person, but he has a propensity to idleness. He has proposed many grand schemes and never delivered any of them. But he also knows that Johnson will read anything, that he is a monster for words. I mean, he can read a lot. He clearly had some sort of ability to read hyperlexia or something.
Yeah.
And so this guy can go back to all the other publishers, because it's a consortium in order to be able to fund it, and say, Samuel Johnson's a brilliant writer. He's got a great reputation on Grub Street for being intelligent and reliable. You also know that he's never done a big project and we need someone who can do that. I can tell you no one knows books like this guy. No one has read as much. No one has read as widely. And so the dictionary comes to him because of his sheer presence in the literary world, physical presence as much as anything. And to begin with, he said, "No, I don't think I'll do that."
Yeah.
And they had to say to him, really, you need to do this, Sam.
Pretty much like that, wasn't it? He never said anything in kind of a roundabout terms.
Because he knew, he would have known better than anyone what an extraordinary task he was undertaking.
So what made the difference? Why did he choose to do it in the end?
Oh, well, I mean, money, ambition, all the normal things. I can't impress on you enough that he has no money. And in the 18th century, that, he's living hand to mouth almost.
And how much was he paid to do it?
I don't remember the exact sum, but it funded him living in Gough Square for many years, for nearly about a decade. And he had several assistants up in the attic who were working with him. So it changed his life in that sense. He and his wife could actually live in a nice house for once.
They were Scotsmen, weren't they?
The amanuenses were Scots. He is famous for his, friendly bantering and baiting of the Scots. What called his prejudice. But he worked with them very happily, so he clearly wasn't that prejudiced. And of course, Boswell was Scottish.
And when he's completed this work, what sort of reception does it get?
Oh, huge, rapturous. I mean, no one's ever done anything like it. This is when he becomes famous. Well, this and The Rambler. And what's extraordinary is he wrote The Rambler while he wrote the dictionary on, literary, moral, philosophical, political, cultural topics.
And this had also gained him a name.
Yeah, huge name. And even his wife said, she said, "I knew you were remarkable, but I didn't know you could do this." And The Rambler, he famously boasted, The Rambler was much later, translated somewhere in Russia. And he said, "Well, my words have traveled further from me than Horace's words ever traveled from him." Horace, of course, being the preeminent Latin poet. So he was very pleased with that. And I think he had worried that The Rambler and the dictionary hadn't brought him as much reputation, as much fame as perhaps he wanted or they should have done. But by the end of his life, The Rambler was really serving him very well. And it's still canonical. So he did both of those together. And so by the end of the 1750s, when he also writes Rasselas, he has become, the undeniable name of English literature. And I think he's the second most important writer we have after Shakespeare.
We've spoken about 4 lives in this conversation.
Yeah.
And there are many, many more we could speak about. And there are many, many more that we can't because we don't know that they either are being formed as we speak, just smaller examples of the same point you make in second act. So let's zoom out now to who really you wrote this book for.
There are many people in the world who are doing fine. They have a job, they're doing great, but it's not everything that they want. And they feel like they have something inside that has to come out, this thing I keep coming back to, right? This book is for them. How do you actually do that? How do you turn around in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s? Some of these people are really quite old in the book, and make the changes. And this, I hope this book has many things that you can actually do in it. Networking is very important. Your peer group is very important, right? Who you choose to spend time with. Making the most of the opportunities that come along. Is it a midlife crisis? Or is it an opportunity to treat yourself as an adolescent and go through a period of prolonged self-examination and adjustment? And so the book is written for those people who they know they have things to do. It's not clear to them when and how they should do them.
I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Henry, thank you very much for joining me on the Booking Club.
Me too.